Hello, I'm Jan Szrewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. So this time around, we're taking a little winter dip in the Baltic. Apparently, if you were planning on skipping World War III, you might want to rethink that vacation in Northern Europe. The speculation is that if Russia and NATO go head-to-head, the opening act could be staged right there, on the sandy Baltic shores. Forget futuristic sci-fi wars in outer space. The next major conflict might kick off in a region better known now as NATO Lake. And you may have already slept through the initial phases of Russia's hybrid warfare being staged there. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
This ship is seen as some to be part of one of Russia's most feared weapons, its Shadow Fleet. These are ships of dubious ownership that Russia uses to circumvent sanctions. The Eagle S is believed to have been responsible for severing the Finnish-Estonian S-Link 2 power line and 4 telecom cables back in 2024. Whether this was intentionally done using the vessel's anchor or just a suspicious accident, it is currently being investigated. But authorities around the Baltic Sea are becoming very concerned about any incidents involving such ships.
Yes, we could call this an attack. It is targeting our critical infrastructure, and 3 times in 1 year is difficult to call an accident.
Prior to the incident involving the Eagle S, undersea cables between Finland and Germany and Lithuania and Sweden had also been cut. In this case, the Chinese-owned Yipeng 3 ship was believed to be involved, though no evidence has been proffered. Experts point out, however, that traces of Russian involvement in hybrid warfare are usually very difficult to find, given the covert nature of the operations. Nonetheless, NATO has ramped up patrols in the Baltic Sea in the wake of these various incidents.
If something should happen, if deterrence would not be enough, the command structure is organized in such a way that we can take effective and efficient action.
With each passing month, European countries are taking the threat of hybrid war increasingly seriously. While the sea is basically a NATO lake after Sweden and Finland joined the alliance, Moscow is hardly expected to let such a geopolitical shift slide.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. There is a certain ominous ring to the phrase war scenarios, which is what many experts and military analysts are conjuring. Picture a group of very serious people in suits hunched over large maps, playing the world's most depressing board game. They are analyzing bases, troop movements, supply lines, and potential flashpoints. So basically, they are the kids in middle school who took Twilight Struggle way too seriously. And now they are telling us that the border between NATO territory and Russia is a jigsaw puzzle of potential powder kegs, especially around Kaliningrad. That little Russian exclave one could forget is in fact Russian at all. The Suwałki Gap in Poland and Lithuania, which is basically a narrow stretch of land that can make or break an entire strategic operation, is the second flashpoint. But we'll come back to the Baltic states a bit later down the line. First, let's talk about Kaliningrad for a moment. Russia's patch of land that's detached from the mainland, like a remote working satellite office with nuclear ambitions. For years, rumors have circulated that Kaliningrad spaces are housing all sorts of goodies, advanced missiles, top-secret equipment, as well as nuclear subs. The point is, we don't really know, but the war in Ukraine has led to the removal of some of that equipment. Regardless of that, given Russia's penchant for chest-thumping whenever it imagines being threatened by NATO, one might wonder what exactly is happening behind those fortress walls. Is this a glorified museum, or is it a potential springboard for an incursion that could spiral into a full-blown conflict? If you can take control of the Baltic corridor, you can disrupt supply lines, hamper troop movement, and generally be the biggest buzzkill at a NATO party. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have found themselves living the plot of an action thriller, constantly looking over their shoulders to see if a certain large neighbor is eyeing them like a buffet spread. It doesn't help that many of their residents have historical memories of Soviet domination, which adds a dash of, "oh, not this again," whenever tensions flare up. And with the region's militaries beefing up defensive measures, you can practically hear the squeak of brand new NATO hardware rolling into these countries. Of course, NATO's official stance says that an attack on one is an attack on all. But let's face it, the devil is in the details. If a conflict does erupt, how quickly can NATO muster forces? Are they going to show up with pristine press statements and strongly worded tweets, or are they prepared to put boots on the ground and planes in the air? One thing is certain, everyone hopes we will not have to find out for ourselves. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Dr. Jacek Raubo, Director at the Defense 24 Analysis Unit. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thank you for the invitation again.
So, the risk of confrontation in the Baltic Sea region, do you think it is greater than it was? Or is the situation changing completely? And if there is a risk of confrontation, would you say that conventional warfare is out of the question?
I suppose we need to accept that right now, when we're thinking about the security toward the Baltic Sea region, we need to accept all of the scenarios, from the conventional warfare to more hybrid operation against our states there, but also when we think about some other forms of pressure, for instance, against our info domain or other cyber attacks. And I think right now it is much more comprehensive situation compared to the past, compared to the situation during this period of time between the first Russian aggression against Ukraine and the second full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
So, would you say that at the present stage, we're actually giving Russia the luxury of even contemplating a full-scale confrontation with NATO? I mean, when it comes to our capabilities, we're not just more powerful economically, but also we do have credible means of deterrence, including nuclear weapons, which is something that often is considered taboo and is not talked about, but it does exist. And it's not just Russia that can use these weapons. So why are we still living in a reality whereby many of us are still thinking, okay, what if a conflict erupts all of a sudden and we're not able to do anything about it?
I suppose we need to be much more optimistic when we think about the defense and deterrence capabilities on the NATO side, and also in the context of strengthening ties between NATO and European Union. Why? First thing, we strengthen our posture toward the eastern flank and also northern flank of NATO by sending their additional forces. We built much better structure to command and control these forces. We see this, for instance, from the Avenger Triad 24 exercises in the last year, where we had some NATO corps were training alongside them. So we are much better prepared for this this larger combat in this region, also to defend different states from north to the south of NATO flanks. So from the military side, I think we are doing a lot of work to strengthen this defense capabilities, but also to build the better deterrence toward Russia. When you are asking me about the nuclear weapons and this kind of strategic deterrence, I think we have had from the Donald Trump a strong word that U.S. is trying to build also this capability to deterrence the enemies like Russia, like China. So this is a strong voice coming from Washington, D.C., but also when we have had some statements before the Senate from the new active Department of Defense Secretary, there was also the part dedicated to nuclear deterrence. So I'm much more optimistic about the sophisticated forms of pressure against the Russian aggressive actions against us. So we need to be much better placed, of course, I think, in one thing, in one issue. This is society deterrence, or our society's deterrence to defend our own values against non-military Russian actions.
So this is hybrid warfare, right? Before we proceed to hybrid warfare, because it is an important issue, I would like to address one thing that some people don't realize, and that is that neither NATO nor the United States actually have a non-first use policy, which means that there is a potential option to use nuclear weapons, even if the other side doesn't do that first. Why is Russia still, seemingly disregarding it? And, we do have like scenarios coming from either intelligence sources or some leaks in the press that Russia might be contemplating military action against NATO's eastern flank. Is it strictly about undermining our belief that NATO is a coherent unit? Because it is not possible that Russia doesn't realize that we do not have a non-first use policy.
Credibility of NATO is always built on two main pillars. First is this military strength we mentioned before, but the second core is, of course, the element of our values. We built NATO as a defensive alliance dedicated to the collective defense. So preemptive strikes and also the discussion about the preemptive strikes with nuclear weapons are not in our agenda, mostly because we can do our tasks without that.
No, of course, I'm talking about a response to a conventional attack, not a preemptive strike, just to make it clear.
There is also a possibility to find more about the Russian actions before they are even planning some large operation with our intelligence, with this synergy of intelligences agencies around the NATO members and also our partners around the world. There is also a chance to build better conventional forces to strengthen our posture against any form of aggression, like with this new maritime mission dedicated to secure the Baltic area. So I'm much more optimistic, but we need to do more, of course, with the synergy between the non-military and military response to the Russian actions. And I also accept that behind us, there is also this nuclear umbrella from the NATO members with this kind of military capabilities.
You're not worried about this not working after Trump has taken office? Some commentators, especially those who are not entirely friendly towards the new administration, have interpreted Trump's comments as suggesting that NATO could be divided into subunits, some of which are deserving of protection, others not so, and that this could ultimately cause the alliance to break apart.
I fully disagree with this type of narrative toward the new administration in Washington, D.C., mostly because for the United States, this part of Europe is very valuable, not only in the context of American military presence here, but also in the context of larger and much more wider rivalry with China. So I think U.S. will provide effective deterrence and defense capabilities in synergy and interoperability with NATO members, NATO partners in the nearest future. So right now we need to focus more on our own capabilities, because I think that might be the biggest question mark stemming from the new Donald Trump administration. How
reaching the spending thresholds,
your
right?
own armed forces.
Reaching the spending thresholds is one thing, right?
I fully accept that we will have this 5% GDP debate soon, very soon.
And you've mentioned the capability of societies to remain resilient in the face of aggression. How are we doing so far? Do you think that the example of Russian tankers operating in the Baltic Sea is anything to go by? What do you think about our response to that, the response in particular of the Nordic states?
Mostly we are focusing right now on building our own independent total defense concepts. Like, for instance, Norway, Finland, Sweden did during the Cold War. Why it's so important? Because this is the synergy, this is the much more holistic picture of the defense resilience and deterrence capabilities. When you are connecting, for instance, society, which is able to create a better response for any types of crises during also war, but also non-war crises, with military, with with paramilitary capabilities. So I think that might be the biggest task, not only for the Nordic states, but also for some eastern flank NATO members, and also southern part of NATO eastern flank. So I think we are doing a lot of things well in a military field, but on the other hand, we need to build much better education for security, for defense issues toward our societies. Inside our firms and also business, we need to strengthen this value of security and cooperation during the crisis time. So I think that might be the biggest task for our future total defense concepts also in Poland.
But do you think that still, when it comes to the Baltic states in particular, of course, these countries have a culture of resilience, right? They know that they live under Russian threats, so they need to be prepared. And most people there know that. But still, these are small countries with little strategic depth. And there is always the question of the Suwałki Gap, for example, being this sort of flashpoint for conflict. Do you think that, regardless of what we all said, Russia could still try doing something, like sending little green men in parallel with what happened in Crimea, just to see whether this resilience and this cohesion within NATO actually exists?
Unfortunately, personally, I think Russia will test our defense and deterrence capabilities in next 5-6 years. It might be some action. It can be action based on some terrorist activities, but also with the hybrid formula dedicated to use some Spetsnaz groups, so Special Operation Forces units, or it might be much bigger crisis with Russian more conventional forces. We need to be prepared for that, and I think it's very obvious that Russia is a very aggressive state, and we need to deterrence and defense our own states for this Russian aggression for a long time from now.
So it is a task that will take a long time and will have to remain in place in order for the deterrence to be a concept that's more than just a flash in the pan, that is long-lasting and ironclad. Dr. Jacek Raubo was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation again.
And now we're moving on to Eastern Newsflash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. The European Union is planning to eliminate reliance on Russian fossil fuels. This decision is meant to be part of the EU's broader strategy to move away from dependence on Russian energy imports.
The European Commission is reportedly developing a new strategy meant to remove Russian fossil fuels from the bloc's energy market. The new strategy will, according to the Commission spokesperson, include a roadmap that will show how exactly Brussels plans to phase Russian fossil fuels out. This ambitious initiative was declared a priority for the new EU Energy Commission that will be fulfilled within the first 100 days of the institution's term. While Brussels has been doubling down on decoupling the EU from Russian energy, gas deliveries from Moscow to the bloc have been continuing. The Commission has said that despite these setbacks, the EU has eliminated coal imports from Russia, greatly reduced oil supply, and has made some progress regarding gas. Russia's presence in the EU's energy market remains a problem in the Commission's eyes, nonetheless.
China has so far emerged as the largest supplier of goods to Russia since the latter's invasion of Ukraine. Beijing has fallen short, however, when it comes to fully replacing Western materials.
China is not only currently Russia's closest political ally, it is also its most important economic partner. Despite Moscow and Beijing ramping up trade to sky-high levels, China has not been able to fully replace the Western equipment and raw materials that Russia has been deprived of by sanctions. Chinese imports have played a role in replacing medical and optical equipment, for example, but only covering 60% of pre-sanctioned supply from Europe. In the case of plastics and polymers, Chinese imports have covered only 40% of EU shipments. The situation is even more dire in pharmaceuticals and aircraft shipments, where China hasn't been able to provide substantial replacements in the double digits. What's more, even though there was an initially massive surge in trade following the invasion, the growth has now stagnated and is not expected to experience any further surges.
A massive Russian hack on Ukrainian government databases has reportedly eroded trust in government institutions. Kiev has recently been making a serious push into digitalization, and the incident poses a serious setback.
In early December 2024, Ukrainians across the country had suddenly been unable to sell cars, file legal claims, or even register marriages through the country's newly digitized government registries. On December 19th, the Ukrainian Justice Ministry announced that a Russian hack had taken many critical government databases under the ministry's oversight offline. The databases contain a multitude of sensitive information, from property ownership to tax records and biometric data. HackNet, a hacking group that has been tied with Russian intelligence, took credit for the hacker attack. The group posted data they claimed to have obtained from Ukraine on their Telegram channel. They also said that they had deleted some of the data that was located in the registries. Although the Justice Ministry has announced that all of the registries were ready to operate, access to some of them remains restricted.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has sparked tensions in the South Caucasus. This time he revived a demand for extraterritorial rights to a land corridor that would connect Azerbaijan proper to its Nakhchivan exclave across Armenian territory.
Despite the months of negotiations which many hoped would result in a peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the situation seems to be taking a turn for the worse. Aliyev's recent demands have rustled feathers in his country's region. The corridor matter was seemingly put aside in August 2024, as both sides had agreed to discuss it once a peace deal was finalized. Armenia has two issues pertaining to the corridor. One involved not wanting to give up sovereignty over the land route, and two, Russia's potential role as a peacekeeper around it. Aliyev's demands aren't the only controversial statement he has made towards Armenia in recent weeks. The demands come after the Azerbaijani president sparked outrage in a January interview by referring to Armenia as a fascist state.
For this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.